in my situation, struggling with mental health, and my bipolar disorder, whenever I get to my lowest moments, the one thing I can hold on to, which I'm always ferociously proud of, is I never give up on myself. I will give myself as much permission as I need to start over.
Welcome to Shaping Freedom with Lisan Basquiat, the podcast where we help you unlock your potential and redefine what it means to be free. I'm your host, Lisan Basquiat. I'm a former corporate executive, a life strategist, and the founder of Shaping Freedom. With a background spanning corporate, artistic, and personal development, I bring a unique perspective to empowering others. Listen in to discover inspiring stories and practical insights that will help you reclaim your life and rewrite your narrative. My intention is for you to gain the tools and motivation to be free in your relationships, your communities, and within yourself. This, my friends, is Shaping Freedom. In my next conversation, I have the opportunity to share and create a safe and vulnerable space with Joseph Aoua Darko. He's an artist. He is a British-born Ghanaian artist. He's an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a curator, a writer, and someone that I've been following for quite some time online. The thing that attracted me most to him as a personality is the fact that he is so deeply tied into and committed to his humanity. He talks openly online about mental health and about his struggles as an artist and as a creative to create through the sea of emotions that can sometimes happen when you're a person who's within the space of creating things. This is a gentleman for you to absolutely watch if you're not aware of him already. And this conversation is a conversation that dives deep into what it feels like to be in that space when you are struggling with your mental health and when aspects of your being and of who you are require you to take a stand for yourself, to build relationship with yourself, and to come to acceptance, love, and forgiveness for yourself and for those around you. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Joseph Aoua Darko. Welcome to the show, Joseph. I'm so glad that we're having this opportunity to have this conversation. And I know that we are many hours apart from each other. So I do appreciate the fact that you're taking time out of your evening to chat with me and for us to create a space between each other and with each other to talk about your life and your journey as an artist.
No, thank you so much. No, we had briefly, I guess, spoken via DM a while back when you came up with that fabulous show, the King Promise show, which I went to go and see. And we had tried to, I think, find an opportunity to speak. So it's sort of uncanny, but also beautiful that our first interaction is on your podcast. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So you saw the King Pleasure exhibition in New York, right?
Exactly. I did. Yes, I did. Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. I think one of the things that my sister Janine and I really appreciated about that experience and that project was how many creative people went to go and see it, and how many artists and families of creatives took the time to go and walk through those doors and walk down those hallways and draw something from Jean-Michel's work. So thank you so much for doing that.
Absolutely. It was very special and very meaningful. And yeah, you should be very proud of yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share that with Janine. The reason I really wanted to talk with you specifically again is, as I mentioned in the intro, is because as an artist, you very often people are creating their art kind of behind closed doors, and we get to see the finished product, but we don't always know what has actually gone into it, the investment of emotional and mental and physical energy that has gone into creating something. And so because you've been so transparent and really you've brought those of us who follow you along on your journey, I thought that that was something that would be incredibly helpful to the audience that listens to the Shaping Freedom podcast. And I really wanted to dive into that with you. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as far as my artistic practice, I've always been, there's always been a rawness and, as you said, a transparency in really sort of presenting the emotional labor that goes into creating my paintings. But also, one thing, the reason why I used Instagram as a tool to speak about the act of creating my work is largely to normalize conversations around mental health, especially mental health when it comes to men, as I identify. And, I think for me, I don't know if you saw the recent BBC article that came out about the nature of how I, go through the process of capturing my emotions in Microsoft Excel on a spreadsheet using color as language. But it was a really important piece for me to speak about with the correspondent Penny Dale, because for me it was a way to invite people into the catharsis and the emotional intensity of the fact that my work speaks directly to my lived experience and my ongoing perennial, I would say, battle with bipolar disorder, which I was diagnosed with when I was 16. And I was in Connecticut about 5 to 6 months ago at the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation. Joseph Albers, quite famously, is sort of the grandfather, or considered the grandfather of color theory. Sort of created that famous book, The Interaction of Color. And for me, it was really empowering to be able to alchemize and use color as vocabulary and engage those principles of color theory to sort of speak to, I guess, my journey with depression. And I think that also creates a very democratic environment where other people can also read into, I guess, what the work means to them. And so in a way, my paintings act as a mirror, in as much as they speak to my very personal journey. There's also a universal quality to the abstract paintings I create in that regard.
Yeah, I didn't see, I saw reference to the article and truthfully, I haven't had a chance to read that, but I was one of the followers who watched you on your journey of documenting how you were doing from one day to the next when you pulled as you were pulling the spreadsheet together. And I found it fascinating, especially because I think sometimes when a person is in it, they, you kind of get lost in the sea and wave of emotions that you wind up, swept up into. And I thought it was brilliant that you actually you chose to use color theory as a way of just really documenting it so that you could take a step back and observe it and see what is actually going on, which I imagine was helpful in some way. So I know we got to watch you doing it. And once it was done, what did you surmise from that experience and that experiment?
I think capturing or I would say documenting is the right word to use, documenting my journey with depression using color theory in that way, or creating that color diary, sort of was an act in radical accountability. I sort of had to confront myself in a way that I probably wasn't used to when I wasn't, actively engaged in this process. And I think what that does is that you begin to sort of bear witness to the story that the spreadsheet is telling you.
Mm.
And you begin to sort of question, um, ways in which you are complicit in enabling yourself to heal from certain environments, and ways in which you are actually of detriment to yourself, in the sense that sometimes we are worst enemies and sometimes we are in the same breath our best friend.
Right.
And I think that that level of accountability was quite unusual for me because it was a deeply introspective exercise, which required me to look inward.
Mm.
And because of the sort of chronology and autobiographical nature of the color diary, you almost, as Bob Marley famously said, you can't run away from yourself.
Mm-hmm. You're there.
And that's because, right? Because all that you have, all that you have lived through is presented in front of you. And so for me, I think that that was definitely something that, improved my relationship with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it allowed me to ask the right questions about what I was experiencing and the triggers surrounding my clinical depression and my bipolar disorder. And sometimes you learn that life is more about those questions than it is about the answer. But sometimes I think that's the framework that I've used to sort of inform my decision making. And so in a way, the work goes beyond art for art's sake. And it really is an exercise in self-improvement, and it's an exercise in self-love as well, because it takes loving yourself enough to be able to, take a step back and look at yourself through the way I have done or managed to do, using these color diaries. And I really found it to be in equal measure, both painful and rewarding,
Mm-hmm.
In many senses, while still coming to terms to what the long-term effects of it will be, because I'm still in it.
Mm-hmm. So are you still documenting things today with the same frequency?
Yeah, I do the diaries every single day, and every hour I update, what mood I'm in, or, I assign a color to how I'm feeling every single hour.
Wow, that's amazing.
Literally. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, again, I'm thinking again about how, people can kind of sit in and wallow in their, and without judgment, but I've been there myself, where I kind of pick up my head and I'm thinking, wow, I'm in this place, this mood, this emotion. And I find it very therapeutic to step outside of something, to be able to look at something. Even like when I'm overwhelmed, the antidote for me is always to get it out of my head. Like it just starts there, no matter what the output is, no matter what the things are that I'm overwhelmed about. And typically they're so much less than what I thought they were when they were swimming around in my head, but it's that act of getting it out and putting it down and looking and saying, oh, wow, this is what's going on. And so it makes, it's perfectly understandable that I'd be feeling the way I'm feeling, and what can I do to clear some of this up? So I think that is a fascinating exercise, and I'm really glad that you were willing to share that. Tell us something about, like, who are you? I know it's the big question. That's a huge question, right? But and a question that I'd love for you to share with this audience. Who are you?
Oh God, it's a very important question, because in a way it's as immensely complex as the answer could be, because I'm trying to answer the question without thinking about my race, my role, my reservations,
Right.
my religion, or lack thereof. It's so interesting how, how we define ourselves as human beings. God, who am I? I'm evolving. I'm the newest one I've come to terms with is that I'm an immigrant
Mm.
in a way that I haven't been before. I'm African through and through. I'm Black beyond Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I'm searching. I'm also categorically uncategorized. Um, and I'm also, you know, not to make this an endless undulating list. Conclusively, I would also say that I am going to be okay.
Yeah.
So I think that these are this is the sort of very reductive list of how I would define myself
Yeah.
if I have to. But yeah.
Thank you for that. And I know it's a big question, so the list needs to be what the list is. One of the other things that you speak about and that I saw in your short, It's Okay, is you did touch a little bit on, for me, what resonated with me was the experience as I'm first generation. My father was Haitian, my mother
Mm,
from Puerto Rico, and I am the daughter of a Haitian immigrant. And growing up in Brooklyn, in this country. So I grew up within, in this country as my father was also acclimating and adjusting to his experience as an immigrant in this country, which
mm,
created a bit of a tension because to have children who are growing up, it's very different than the experience that he expected, I guess, or was more accustomed to as a parent here in a new land and in a new country. In your short, It's Okay, which was so beautiful and so generous. You talked a bit about the ways that mental health gets treated with different backgrounds, in different countries. But I think that the experience of a lot of us is very similar to that, in that mental health is treated so differently and with so much, you didn't say this, these are my words, so much judgment and accusation in a way that's very different from having some kind of a physical ailment or a physical diagnosis of some kind.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
you touched on that. And I saw it very, very recently. And that really struck me because that is the experience of so many people. And so, can you talk a little bit about how, I guess, about that short and kind of what, maybe diving a little bit deeper? And I encourage you all who are listening, find the It's Okay short. It's on his page, Joseph's page. Okunta Kinte is his
Yes.
handle. And watch it. It really talks a lot about some of the things that so many of us are thinking about mental health and religion and how and how those things kind of intermingle. Can you maybe take us a little bit deeper into that?
Yeah, of course. So I did that project with a friend from university, my alma mater in Ghana, Manchester University, and it was a very complex time in my life because I was, really considering. I had struggled with my mental health for a very long time, and I was going through lots of suicidal ideation at the time as well, which I've had on and off throughout my life. Um, the most recent being 3 or so years ago, and I think that for me, it was important to do that short documentary because I wanted to express myself and the deep frustration I felt as somebody who comes from a traditionally Ghanaian Catholic family, which is remarkably religious.
Mhm.
My grandmother, just for context, is a dame of the Catholic order. So we had two pilgrimages to the Vaticano, and
Mm.
she had private papal audience with both popes in her lifetime as an octogenarian. So it's like
It's a big deal.
she it is, and she brought the first Catholic parish to her village in Ghana.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's so very layered. And I remember how, I remember telling my parents who, I'll give my parents credit. They've gone on a journey of denial to accepting with some apprehension still, but there is acceptance of what it means for me to live with bipolar disorder.
Do you know that we have a line of Shaping Freedom wellness products? Each are beautifully crafted and designed to support you in cherishing your mind, body, emotions, and soul. Carve out a sanctuary in your life with our Luxe sustainable yoga and meditation mats, essential oil candles, and more. Embrace self-care and reflection with every item, lovingly created to enhance your daily practice of spending time on you. Elevate your wellness journey with Shaping Sanctuary Collection because you deserve to feel balanced, nurtured, and inspired. Visit shapingsanctuary.com for more information.
And I think that for them, it was a real challenge because there is a sense of taboo culture in Ghana, especially around speaking openly about mental health.
Mm.
And, Ghana is a remarkably, for better or for worse, a religiously sovereign nation. Religion is there's a joke that, my friends and I sometimes tell each other, which is that there are more churches than banks in Ghana.
Okay.
It's a remarkably religious
That's the
country.
scene for sure. Yeah.
And I think part of that means that because of the nature of mental health issues or mental illnesses, because they aren't equivalent to a cut artery or physical bleeding or a physical injury, because there's a sense of the intangible, it is unfortunately sometimes either belittled, mocked, invalidated, or entirely rejected and yielded solely to the essence of being addressed with spirituality and religion. And I would say more religion than
More
spirituality.
religion than spirituality.
Exactly.
I think.
Exactly. I was being generous.
Yes.
by saying spirituality. And I went through that in my own household, and when I was much younger and struggling with trying to like really speak to what I was actually going through and trying to, occasionally being accused of just simply seeking attention, so it was difficult to know within myself that I was deeply troubled.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have my feelings and my experience as somebody who was eventually diagnosed as bipolar, to be told that, that I wasn't really, going through what I was going through. And look, our parents, and I think most people can speak to this experience, parents do the best they can and the best they know how to. And sometimes when that know-how, or as the French say, that savoir-faire, and knowledge base and foundation isn't there when it comes to things that have to do with mental health, you sometimes can't blame them for how they choose to react.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very lucky that eventually my parents yielded and took me to a clinical psychologist to get evaluated and to get diagnosed, because I think that was a very transformative moment in my adolescence, And so the video and the documentary, the short film that we created was my way of normalizing discussions around that. Mm-hmm. And I've been invited to speak about the documentary at one or two mental health conferences, and I've had the privilege, of really trying to continuously advocate for the normalization, which is a very important word to me, the normalization of difficult, inconvenient discussions around mental health issues, like on the African continent and beyond, because I think not enough people are able to do that. And I think the last thing I'll say is that sometimes I think people also confuse, especially in Ghana, where, Maslow's hierarchy of needs takes its place as a, I hate the term, but as a global South nation. that has an emerging economy. You know, people feel as if, you know, for better or for worse, my family is relatively known in Ghana's business scene. My grandfather, who, you know, when he came back from England, founded Ghana's first, insurance company, which is now 48 years old. And my father, who's an actuary, and knowing, I think, especially within the local hero context of my family's legacy in the finance world, again, there were also like these very reductive misconceptions that because I came from some degree of, you know, affluence, that I was merely suffering from affluenza and self-indulgent self-pity, and that I shouldn't have any worries because I was, you know, laying within the bosom of my privileges. And I think again, you know, what we now know is, you know, for as time has gone by, and this has been documented in film and cinematography, show me a trust fund kid and I'll show you a remarkably depressed and unhappy person. And we now know, obviously, that there is no, you know, not that I am, by the way, because I'm not, but we know that there isn't necessarily a correlation between having profligate or access to profligate resources or profligate wealth and being mentally stable or mentally happy, or, you know, or mentally sound. And so I think, again, I was dealing with all those, you know, as a teenager, I was dealing with all those like gaslighting, very dismissive, invalidating statements about my lived experience. And funny enough, you know, when you think about the gaslighting and the sort of the misrepresentation of people who speak about their journey with mental health as attention seeking, you know, the artist Tracy Emin also sort of gets a bit of a hard time for speaking about that. But it's almost, you know, the way society treats people who speak openly about their journey with mental health is almost the same way, which it's a weird juxtaposition, but it's almost the same way society treats victims or survivors, I should say, who come forward about sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of a weird parallel. The gaslighting, the belittling, the invalidation. It's a very weird parallel that only just came to mind now. But that's what it feels like if you're being told that what you are going through isn't what you're going through. And it's a very complex thing to sort of have to navigate, especially in a very conservative religious community, you know, like what Ghana is, as I'm sure many other people can relate in different parts of the world. And that, yeah, the documentary and the short film was my way of speaking openly about that, but at an elevated, you know, distinct quality, so that it cut through, you know. And so I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to watch it, and I'm you know, and I must have, I did this project a long time ago, so I'm glad it sort of lasted the test of time, and
Mm-hmm.
that it still somewhat resonates.
Yeah, I think it's also this, I think that society in a lot of countries, I think that there's this resistance to the admission of imperfection, however that shows up, whether it's mental health or whether it's, I don't know, wearing dreadlocks before dreadlocks are well known, or being an artist in the cultures that want you to do something different. I think it comes down to this idea, this the dehumanization of people, of, you know, of human beings. And I think that a lot of the society, at least here in the United States, is really about, you are better when you're less human, when you ignore and neglect your humanity. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of room for human emotion, struggle, having a hard time getting through something. It is, you know, this kind of like, buck up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get it together. People are going to see you. And so I have a tremendous amount of respect. I'm very inspired by your transparency and your willingness to really put a stake in the ground to normalize mental health issues and struggles that people go through, because the truth of the matter is that we all do, all of us, to one degree or another, and from 1 hour to the next. or one chapter to the next. This is truly the human experience. And I think it's very important for all of us to accept that and to allow ourselves to bear witness to what may seem as imperfection. You know, my mother struggled with mental illness. And this was something that took me a really long time to even talk about or mention, because there's such a stigma around it. And there's such a judgment for the person. And so for me, it was years as a young person, really going back and forth between who was my mother and what was her illness. And, you know, being able to connect to my mother through what sometimes felt like a barrier because of the illness. I'm very happy, or I'm encouraged that today it is something that is becoming more normalized so that we can talk about it. And so that people and families and men and women and children can live with the struggle that they have mentally and emotionally. So you can still live with it, versus it being a kind of a death sentence to your ability to integrate and to be part of the world and to function in community and being loved. So again, you know, thank you for being willing to be a voice for that, which I know and can imagine isn't easy, especially, you know, coming from a culture that, you know, hasn't quite gotten there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate what you said. And for me, for me, it was about creating a safe space to have, for other people to feel as if they could also speak about,
yeah,
their experiences. I think I've been so touched by the number of DMs, emails, physical mails, messages I get from people who are always encouraging me to keep sharing and keep, obviously with healthy boundaries, but people who feel like the permission I've given myself to be vulnerable also gives them permission to do the same within their own community. And I've been so touched by the gentle ripple of courage that my content and my openness allows for. And that's why sometimes, even if it's to my detriment at times, which I'm sure it is, that I am willing to be raw, and I'm willing to, there are probably at least 10 different clips of me crying in some regard on one of my reels on my page. And it's not because I enjoy like seeing myself
it's like
crying.
what was happening, yeah.
Or because I relish in the supposed supposed attention that it gets. No, it's more for people to know that we do cry. Like, it's not and sometimes you're about to record, because we all we've all been in our homes sort of where we're passively creating content, where you cry without even realizing that that's about to happen on the screen. Because I know that there's a whole like trend of people making fun of people who record themselves crying on social media, but
Yeah,
and I understand that, but it's more to do with the fact that I've kept videos of myself where I have broken down in an entirely unintended capacity, because maybe you're just talking into the screen and it's sort of you're just overwhelmed. But the reason why I've allowed that to be shown, I've allowed that side of me to be seen, is for people to know that at the end of the day, it's okay. Like crying is your body's way of reconciling with itself.
Yes.
It is a privilege to feel something profoundly that you are moved for your tear ducts to activate, and that sharing it and opening it up about the fact that it does happen is just another portal into the human experience that we all go through. And so to shame someone for being able to share that, and for having the courage to be that raw, is remarkably uninteresting, I think. and you know, and so for me, I've been so privileged and humbled in equal measure to be part of a community I think I'm building through my platform on Instagram, at least, which allows other people to feel as if they have permission to also be vulnerable, to also be seen, not just by other people, but by themselves, you know, because a lot of people don't see themselves. You spoke about who am I? You know, many people can't define themselves beyond their roles and their obligations and their occupation.
Yeah.
You know, they can't. It doesn't exist. You know, and so what you ask could be a very triggering question to most people who haven't taken the time to get to know themselves. And I think, again, without belaboring the point, I think men navigate an ocean of role play, especially in a way that patriarchy imposes on men, and in a way that sometimes women in many ways
them.
reinforce, you know, participate in.
Yeah.
And so in my life, I've come across male friends who, beyond, you know, the value they place on themselves is largely through their competency at a job or their ability to provide for their family. And that's all well and good. It's remarkably important to feel like you're able to do these things and to take genuine pride in being able to do these things, but to also know that isn't really who you are.
And that's not all you are. And that's not all you are. Yes.
Exactly. That it is that those obligations and roles in all their nuances form an important part of the fabric of your entire being. And so for me, that's been the most rewarding thing, like getting and enabling people to feel like they also have a safe space to just really express themselves to themselves and to others. And I hope that I continue to be a beacon of hope in that regard. You know, that people look at my content, look at my art, look at my writing, and feel that they too can participate in their own unraveling, for the better, of course.
I appreciate you going into that, because I was going to ask you, you talked in the beginning of the conversation about Black men or men in general, and how challenging it is to unpack, you know, because there is this kind of tension and conflict between being in touch with your emotions, being in touch with your feelings, expressing what those feelings are, and then being told how to do it, or when to do it, or before what audience to do it. And as a woman, I observe and I can see where there is some semblance of shame, you know, toward men for being in touch with or for expressing themselves emotionally. And if you look at how unhappy so many men are, I think that there's a reckoning that's happening today where, you know, just like mental health, even that discomfort or that unhappiness is starting to come to the surface. And we're seeing it in so many different ways. And it has to happen, because that is really that's kind of the birth of a new chapter for all of us. Is, you know, you cannot transition and transform into something new without allowing all parts of us to reckon with who they are, how they're showing up, what's happening, and the things that are creating the conflict between gender and between and within families, you know, and amongst human beings.
Yeah, no, for me, it always gives me food for thought. And I read somewhere in the New York Times a while ago that most men will receive their first set of flowers when they're, you know, when they're being buried, or you know, at their own funeral, or that, you know, statistically, which is also another, you know, shocking one for me. But if you think about it carefully, most men, the conduit through which they experience some form of intimacy is either through violence or sex. And when you think about that, when you sort of strike that epiphany, it is very bleak.
Do you know that we have a line of Shaping Freedom wellness products? Each are beautifully crafted and designed to support you in cherishing your mind, body, emotions, and soul. Carve out a sanctuary in your life with our Luxe sustainable yoga and meditation mats, essential oil candles, and more. Embrace self-care and reflection with every item, lovingly created to enhance your daily practice of spending time on you. Elevate your wellness journey with Shaping Sanctuary Collection because you deserve to feel balanced, nurtured, and inspired. Visit shapingsanctuary.com for more information.
When you think about what that must be like, but we don't reconcile with it in a way that allows us to identify it as a problem. We have normalized that, though. We haven't questioned, why that is a problem or why that is problematic in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, as a gay man, I also had to unlearn a lot of conditioning surrounding the way I was brought up in a country that doesn't, where it is not legal to exist as a gay man, that has extensive anti-LGBTQIA plus legislation, from things to mob justice of lynching of gay men in Ghana, to sort of the shame that comes with the gay community or the queer community, I should say, in Ghana in general, how they are antagonized.
Mm-hmm.
I had to really unlearn a lot of remarkably toxic macho tropes I was inculcated with as a child. Things like never crying, and in the Akan language in Twi, they would say something along the lines of Berman, like men don't cry, like that's not really a thing that men do, and there are these very one-dimensional ideas of like what a man's role is. And I found that as I grew older and as I sort of left my family, which is a whole other story, when I was 19, I think there was a great unlearning that took place for sure, in being able to be kind to myself as well, which was knowing that I was worthy of, as much as I pride myself in my grit and my tenacity and my strength, that I was also allowed to be soft. I was also like entitled to some sense of softness, in some regards, which sometimes I denied myself because I thought that wasn't what I was supposed to want or to be. So there's a whole balance that comes with like sort of the culture of what most men in Ghana go through, and I'm sure in other parts of the world, where I really did have to sort of like find it within myself to be kind to myself, because
which is incredibly
there was a long period of
courageous
time where that didn't happen.
Yeah, it's so courageous, especially to make that into something out of nothing. To make the decision that within yourself, within your own being, that you're going to develop a relationship with yourself that is unlike anything that you've seen. I think that takes an incredible amount of the very things you said: grit, courage, strength, love, kindness, patience, and grace, to be able to muddle through the ways that religion and spirituality were presented, and the supposed tos and the shoulds that sometimes we live with, and to take a stand to decide how you are going to exist on this planet is incredibly courageous and brave and pioneering, because that helps to change. That helps to change the fabric both of your own life, your own family, your own existence, but it also helps to change the fabric for other people for whom, without you, may be themselves kind of in the, in the shackles of isolation and repression, internal repression. So I think that the way that you are choosing to show up during your lifetime is remarkable and so generous. And I mean that sincerely. So very generous. Can we talk a little bit about your art?
Of course, here we can.
How did
Absolutely.
how did that come to be? What is your
Oh
journey as an
God.
artist?
I was always the kid in boarding school who was bullied for being like the art geek. I was obsessed with Leo Castelli and obviously Jean-Michel Basquiat, and was always carrying around these fat Biden, Taschen, Azuline coffee table books about all these behemoths
That
in
each weigh
contemporary
about
art
80
history.
pounds.
Exactly, right.
Those are
So
books.
I was that guy.
Yeah.
I was that guy carrying all those books to art class, being bullied for it, didn't care.
Yeah.
Wanted to be part of the contemporary art world, knew that I had a natural affinity for contemporary art, knew that that was my path in life. And sort of throughout my boarding school experience, took art class very seriously. Fast forward, I'm in university, and an artist who I really respect and appreciate, Fabrice Monterio, who is also a friend of mine. He comes to my alma mater in 2016 to do a project where he asked for volunteers. Fabrice is a very remarkable photographer who does a series on environmental degradation, and he invited a few of us who volunteered to what was at the time dubbed Africa's largest electronic waste dump site, Agbobloshi, in Ghana, where I did a lot of my ethnocentric and empirical research with the World Bank's Climate Innovation Center. And that was when I fell in love with the process of art making as a concept, seeing Fabrice, who had at the time won the coveted Greenpeace photography prize. It was just great to sort of see him in his element, working and sort of world building. And that's how I came to sort of, pursue my career in art making as an artist myself. I had my first solo exhibition with a small gallery in Ghana called Gallery 1957. And fast forward to now, I'm in museums like the Stanley Museum of Art at the University of Iowa, at the Narrows Foundation, which is a World Heritage Site. And I now have my first solo exhibition in London, which is my fourth career solo, but my first in London, with Ed Cross, which is going to be exhibited up until the 24th of October. And the title, How is Your Day Going?
Okay.
And so it's been a whirlwind. And obviously,
where is that?
Sorry.
Where in London is that one?
So it's in East London, at Cross Fine Art. And it's not that difficult to find. It's a charming gallery space. And I'm very honored to be working with a gallerist like Ed, who has supported and encouraged, for the 15 years he's spent in the art world, amazing artists like Anya Paintsel and Sahara Long. And so I just feel so honored to be a part of that gallery program, and to be exhibiting in London in a show that began in September, which is a very important month in the art world calendar. And so, yeah, I've reached a point in my life where I'm really grateful that after 8 years of trying and trying and trying, I finally got to a point in my career where I feel as if I'm achieving some sort of like lateral flow, where I'm confident in the work I'm making.
Yeah. But
also, much like other artists in history, like one of my favorites, Barbara Chase Drabu, or like Donald Judd, or like Marcel Duchamp, who was friends with Peggy Guggenheim. My role in the art world has also been curatorial, and something I'm sure you can relate to as a legacy curator yourself. I've created a number of exhibitions, from debut African contemporary group exhibitions with really amazing galleries in Berlin, like Perez Projects, to institutional shows like with Sotheby's, to exhibitions by artists I just really respect and admire, like there's this incredible Ghanaian artist called Della Anya who creates these beautiful tapestries from upcycled and discarded rubber tires, essentially. Did an amazing exhibition with him. I think it must have been a year or two ago at the Nabuke Foundation in Ghana. And most recently did the catalog essay for Sachi Yates for a two artist showing where my friend Noku was showing her works in dialogue with Bruce Norman. So I've also loved the curatorial side of the art world, right? And I've always enjoyed that. And much like the artist I described, writing is also a passion of mine. I have a deep and profound love affair with words, and sometimes they love me back. and so I'm at a stage in my life where I'm sort of navigating both a literary practice as a writer, publishing my first book with Thames and Hudson, Dear Artists, which comes out next year in the summer of 2025.
Which you took us, those of us who follow you, took us a little bit through that journey. You've been kind of sharing some of that journey with us, which we appreciate.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, because that book was basically an accident, right? I was going through this difficult period for about 2-3 years where I wasn't actively making art. So I sort of was writing these post-its, all beginning with Dear Artist to myself, actually. And, decided at random to post one of the post-its for the first time in September of last year. Fell asleep after posting it on my Instagram and woke up having had Viola Davis and Ava DuVernay and so many other people I admire, FKA Twigs reposting my words. And then, was then approached by Thames and Hudson do some referrals to then, do a book of my post-its, which were basically just aphorisms to encourage myself to keep going as somebody who was really dying to get back into the act of art making. So for me, my life has been, as short as it has been, given that I'm 28 and survived the 27 club, which we all
which
know
is a challenging.
We probably both have a very complicated relationship with, given.
Do you mind? I'm glad you brought that up. I wasn't intending to talk about that at all. But it is a thing. It is a thing. And it's certainly a thing for men. Would you mind describing or explaining what that is? What the 27 Club is?
Yeah, it's just this, for those who don't know, it's just this phenomenon where most artists, creative people at a certain creative point in their lives, Jimi Hendrix being another popular example, apart from your brother, of blessed memory, don't live past 27. And it's, there's something about that age, and I don't want to get emotional, but there's something about that age where this phenomenon of adulting and it's multitudes. You have friends getting married. You have friends who have even survived to 25. You have friends just about to give up on themselves. You have friends who are thriving as if nothing's happening. It's a very conflicting part of your 20s, I must say. And as somebody who obviously has publicly struggled, obviously, with suicidal ideation, I broke down on my 28th birthday because I could have quite easily fallen into that category, because it was probably the most beautiful and challenging year in my adult life. It was the year that I named my abuser publicly with no game plan at all. It was the year that I was awarded one of the most prestigious artist residencies on planet Earth, which was the Arbus Foundation. It was also the year that I came out as gay publicly in a way that was not ambiguous, but was very clear and positioned. It was also the year that, I made some really bold decisions about how I was going to navigate taking care of myself. and really putting myself first in certain situations as opposed to what I was, as a recovering people pleaser. So it was a very radical year for me where I could have quite easily succumbed to the elements, and yeah, in the great words of Snoop Dogg, who I never thought I'd be quoting. Yeah, I would love to thank myself for, for really just like showing up.
Yeah.
And for, one thing that I will say, whenever I get to my lowest moments, and that happens to everybody, but especially in my situation, struggling with mental health, and like bipolar disorder, whenever I get to my lowest moments, the one thing I can hold on to, which I'm always ferociously proud of, is I never give up on myself. I will give myself as much permission as I need to start over and to do a redo, like it's a Mario Kart game. It doesn't matter how much I feel I have deteriorated or messed up or fallen off the horse. I have never, I may romanticize giving up on myself, but when push comes to shove, when it gets to the hilt of it all, I'm always the first person within myself to say, let's give it one more try. Let's just keep going. And I think that's been, if there's anything I'm proud of, anything at all, if there's one thing I'm proud of, when it comes to my existence on this planet, it's that, I refuse to believe that I'm not worth it. And that, and I refuse to ever put myself in a position where no matter how sub-zero my emotions get, I will never give up on myself entirely as a concept. And I think not allowing myself to get to that point has really been my bedrock. And I think sometimes it sounds cheesy, it sounds like truism, it sounds like it's been tried, tested, said, and told 1,000 times, but it's probably because it's an open secret that, being stubborn with, I think resilience is simply a stubbornness of the spirit to refuse to succumb to the elements.
Yeah.
And so that's really what resilience is. And I think I have managed to build that internal mechanism within myself over time. Of course, Rome wasn't built in a day. Neither was my ability to navigate these emotions, these strong emotions. But I've built the internal mechanism to really hold on at all costs. And I think I wish that it was a mechanism that I could almost like put in a bottle and give to people for free, because it really is it really is one of the most empowering things to know, to be able to like tell yourself that you are worth it, and to also believe it.
Yes.
Which is another thing in of itself. And so that's one thing that I think, that circling back to what it means to be 27. I definitely think, I don't know how it was for you, but I definitely think it's a time in your life where there's so many conflicting elements about who you are and why you are and what you are and where you're going. And you have to sort of rise above that almost debilitating anxiety that comes with being that age. Just as 30 is about to rear its ugly, pretty head.
Beautiful head. Beautiful head.
Exactly.
I assure you.
Exactly.
I assure you.
Head. But we all sort of, when we're in our 20s, we all sort of like have this irrational fear of being 30, which and I don't know where that came from. I don't know, but it seems to be there.
The decade of the 30s is a wonderful. I think they're all wonderful, quite frankly. And the 27 Club is, sometimes it can overcome or overtake a person, or they can believe that it does. But in my experience, I've witnessed men in particular, right around 27, 28, like really having this reckoning with their lives. And I don't know why it seems more prominent in men, or prevalent in men over women. I'm not sure about that, but I do know that it's something that I have noticed quite a bit. And if there was anything, to say to someone, I think you've just said it, that it really is something that you can work through, and that you can use as an opportunity to learn more about yourself and to deepen your relationship with yourself, and also to start to unravel and unpack some of the programming and some of the ideologies that are fed, that are kind of deeply buried or have been deeply buried into you about yourself and about the world and how you're supposed to show up. I think it can also be a very liberating time when a young man or a man looks at his life to say, okay, I'm here. This is who I am. And this is how I'm going to choose, to show up.
I'm curious to ask you, by the way, did you have, I mean, it might be a deeply ignorant question, but did you encounter, or maybe let me frame it this way. Did you see Jean-Michel go through that when you encountered him at 27, if you did at all? And how was that for you, if you did?
I did. I didn't know enough at the time to know what it was. It wasn't until much later that I started to take a look back at life, and through the work that I do, around human behavior and looking at patterns. It wasn't until much later that it dawned on me that that's what was going on. And I think that sometimes when a man encounters that time in their life, it also depends on what's happening on the periphery of their kind of internal inquiry and investigation. I think the one thing that I don't have any regrets in my life. And the one thing, if I knew then what I know now, I would have said is exactly what you just said and what we just talked about, which is, it feels overwhelming and there's something on the other end of it, Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking that. You're welcome. You're welcome. So in the interest of time, I do want to ask you one final question, and that is, how can we support you?
That's very, very thoughtful question. To be honest, I would say, through what you're doing now, I think platforming people like me and giving us a safe space to share our stories is help enough. I'm always so grateful to be able to speak about what I'm going through and my journey, in the hopes that it will inspire, or better still, I much prefer the word enlighten someone else on how they too can navigate the world through their art and through their work, as you do. And I'm always profoundly enamored by people like yourself who are willing to sort of engage in meaningful dialogue, because that's basically how we propel humanity forward. It's so funny how communication and sort of I mean, we aren't breaking bread right now, but sort of how breaking bread with each other, sort of being in community through these spaces, sort of does more good than we realize.
Absolutely.
And like I said, the ripple effect from that is often something that we can't tangibly put our hands on, but it is impactful. And so you've already done it, I would say, enough by the platforming creatives like me and people just doing the best they can to really live their truth through their artistic practice or whatever creative outlet through which they alchemize their being. So that is literally all that art is. It is footprinting, in the hopes that in some regard, the record of your essence, what you've survived, lives beyond you, whether it's in song, painting, sculpture, film, in podcasting, whatever it is. We're all just leaving records of ourselves behind. Ultimately,
absolutely.
That's what
no matter what we are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So thank you, and I really appreciate being given the opportunity to sort of thoroughly engage in that dialogue and conversation with you.
Yeah. So, thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your sharing, both here during this conversation and in the way that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. It means a lot to a lot of people. We see you. We appreciate you so much. And, I'm rooting for you. I really am. And I'm glad that we have had this, beautiful opportunity to put some really important things that need to be talked about on the table. And I see this as our contribution to normalizing some of these very important and big topics. And so thank you for us being able to come together to create this space and to create that kind of healing for those folks who are listening. I really do appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Thank you so much for having me. It means a lot.
You're welcome, Joseph.